Hello, it's Writing Wednesday. I have a slight sore throat, so if I lose my voice, you'll know that it was this Wednesday. Um, I have been doing a lot of thinking about writing. I was just at AWP, Associated Writing Programs, has its big convention every year. This was in Tampa, and I gave a panel on structuring the novel. I was on a panel, and I've just been giving a lot of thought to writing. And one of my correspondents, one of you guys, Jeffrey, has been asking me a number of questions. Will I answer his questions on this week's video? And I compiled today's topic. The books that influenced me, the books that will make people better writers. But he also asked another question, does fan mail help or hurt a writer? Well, a little bit of a pat on the back always helps. Always helps. Fan mail never. Hate mail doesn't help. But fan mail is always good. Hi. So I thought I would take a look at the books that I have made me a better writer. I'm somebody who is, for many years, was self-trained. I read a lot of books. I took classes at Extension. I worked with somebody pretty late in my formative era, worked with a wonderful writer to progress, but I didn't do a big program. But the books in my life that helped are essential, and I think Jeffrey was definitely wanting a clue in of what's essential. So we're going to start with the essential of the essential. Dictionary. Writers need a decent vocabulary, and you have to work at it. When you read books, if you come across words that you don't know, make a list. When you get to the end of your reading, open that dictionary and fill in all the words. Don't break while you're reading. It slows you down. But if you can you can guess what things mean, write the word down, then check and see if you really knew what it meant, whether you were right. And if you're reading up to grade level, everything you read, there should be at least a couple of words in a day's reading that you don't know. That's how you know whether you're really reading enough to feed yourself as a writer. If I read writers like Nabokov, I'll end up with 20 words in a day that need to be looked up. So dictionary like this is fine. I don't like dictionaries and thesauruses on your computer. They just don't have enough words. This is fine. This is an old collegiate. You can go ahead and get one off of off a used book site. I like abebooks.com just because they seem to have everything. Half off books is fine. Better World. There's lots of used books online. But get yourself, this is a Webster's 7th Collegiate Dictionary. This was my childhood dictionary, and it still works fine. Need to work on vocabulary, building vocabulary all the time. I noticed when my daughter was younger, she bristled that I always made her read the classics. But when you look at contemporary works and then you look at the classics and you realize the change in vocabulary, you realize why you need to read the classics. Write those words down and then they're yours. The second book that you need, everybody needs, is the Roget's Thesaurus. I like this. Do not use the one on your computer. It doesn't know enough words. You know more words than it does. I get the one with the finger tabs, so you refer in the back and then you go to the number of the concept in the front. This is invaluable. This is a 3rd edition Roget's International Thesaurus. Now, one of the things we've talked about before is getting the right word, not just one-size-fits-all word, but the right word for that spot in that sentence that's going to blow my hair back. The perfect word. When you can't think of it, when it's on the tip of your tongue, don't just throw in a stand-in. Get out your thesaurus and look through and see if you can find the right word. Now, one thing that's difficult for many people who are trying to expand their vocabulary is they use words they really don't know quite what they mean. So they'll find them in the thesaurus, and they'll hi Jeffrey, I'm doing your question. First one was the dictionary, second is the thesaurus, so with the finger tabs. When people try to expand their vocabulary, they often use words incorrectly, and it really is very jarring to the reader. So if you're using a new word and you found it in the thesaurus, go back to the dictionary and make sure that you're using it correctly, that it's the right word, as well as a word that sounds good. But when you need the word, it's on the tip of your tongue, you can't find it, don't let that moment pass. Go to the thesaurus and find the right word. If you notice you're using the same word over and over again and you need a synonym, because we're going to avoid all those repetitions, go to your thesaurus. You see mine has tape. I actually talked to a bookbinder about maybe treating myself and having this thing rebound. This is my thesaurus I've had since I was a kid. And all the words are in your thesaurus. So that is a really active work. Then, okay, you're not going to like this, but see, I got my stack over here. So I'm going to take the next one. And many of you are not going to like this because most of us didn't go to a super-duper school where you got a lot of grammar. Grammar wasn't popular. I grew up in the 70s, and grammar wasn't the thing that people learned in the 70s. Everything was relevant, but nobody learned grammar. So most of what I know from about grammar is from reading, so I know what a grammatically correct sentence looks like. I know I can tell when something's wrong just because I've read so much. But sometimes you need to know the rules of grammar. And diagramming sentences, who thought that would be interesting? But once you start writing sentences and really trying to fashion a beautiful sentence, an interesting sentence, or looking at sentences of the master stylists and understanding how they create the effect, how the sentence is structured, who knew that this would become a favorite? Everything's backwards. I don't know how to flip this. But this is just an old-fashioned, when Barnes & Noble was still a publisher, this is the Barnes & Noble English Composition College Outline Series. And it is fascinating, and it will remind you what's a choppy sentence, what is, how do you develop sentence grammar. Oh my God, you need it. And if you're writing, you will find it really interesting. Nothing I ever thought would be interesting, a grammar book. But just get yourself a basic grammar, just so you know when you use which and when you use that. Every writer should own this. Then there is, then we get into the writing, the actual writing books. But those three you need. English comp book, a thesaurus with the, a thesaurus with the finger tabs, and a decent little dictionary that isn't too hard to pick up. Then you get into the writing books. If you were only going to buy one ever, this is the one. It is John Gardner's The Art of Fiction. This is the best, and if you're only going to buy one, this is the one to get. It's Notes on Crafts for Young Writers, and nobody says you have to be young. It talks about all the tools of writing that we've been talking about in these videos. It has exercises. It talks about the music of writing, which most places don't. The poetics of the line. He even scans them. As someone who never took English, that's kind of scary. But the more you work with it, the more it starts to make sense. It's all about errors and technique and truth. It talks about the soul of writing. This is the master work. So this is the Desert Island book, and all writers who have this reread it periodically. I do. This is it. This is the guy. Maybe I can switch it. I'm going to try to switch it. Here we go. And then I can hold it up. Okay, yeah. Oops. Okay, there it is. That's the Gardner Art of Fiction. Okay. Yay. All right. Then the next book that I recommend is Annie Dillard's Living by Fiction. I'm going to switch this out so you can see it. There it is. Living by Fiction by Annie Dillard. Annie Dillard is one of the greats. She's one of the great writers. Her Tinker at Pilgrim Creek is Pilgrim at Tinker Creek is one of the great books of essays in our time. She is a crisp, precise writer. Her prose is itself artful and beautiful. And Living by Fiction is an examination of the conversation that literature is. And especially, I'm someone I had like AP English, but I didn't take English in college. I was Russian, did all my stuff in Russian. So it was like an entry to the conversation that is literature. We are not just out here talking to ourselves. Literature is a freeway that is already in motion, and you enter the conversation. So what have people been saying before you, and what are people saying in other parts of the world, and in what ways can you join the conversation? So try not to think of yourself as coming full-blown out of your own forehead. Literature is, you're joining a larger conversation, and where in that conversation do you want to be? And this is the book to enter. I mean, she talks about modernism, she talks about various contemporary writers, how fiction matters, what that meaning, the way fiction makes meaning is every bit as important or more important than what nonfiction does, even though she's a nonfiction writer. She also writes fiction, and it's killer. She's funny, and she's really talking about the life of the mind. So this, if you read only the John Gardner and this, plus the 3 reference guides, the Dictionary of the Big Thesaurus, and an English comp book, you're going to be set to go. But there's more. Of course. There's more. I like to be in touch with the way various writers think about writing. And this series, Writers at Work, and I'll flip it so you can see. This is an old copy. So Writers at Work, and it's interviews with all of these writers talking about writing. So, I mean, Faulkner was still alive, Styron was still alive, Nelson Algren, all these people were still alive and talking about their art form. And there's like 6 books, 8 books, I don't know how many books there are in that series, but seek that out. So you want to hear how Faulkner saw his literary project. You want to hear about, everybody, not everybody, I haven't done this, but it's a Paris Review, and many, many people have done these interviews, and they are so inspiring, so invaluable. They can disagree, they mostly do, in what they think is important about fiction, and then what they agree on, is true. Then there is a book that I adore called The Art Spirit by Robert Henri, Henri. And I'll put this around the front so you can see it. This guy, Robert Henri, was an art teacher. Let's see. He was an art teacher at the Art Institute of Chicago. And this is about being an artist. And this is the most inspiring book when I feel sort of stupid and out of touch with my art form. I will take a look and read. I'll just pick him up and start reading, because everything he says about visual art is also true about literary art. And I find it incredibly inspiring. So you read it and see if you can translate what he's saying about the visuals. But he talks about the spirit of art, that it's such an antidote for our times where everything's a hamburger. Everything is something to be sold. Everything is branding and platforms and bestsellering and what have you. This is not about any of that. This is about one's connection to oneself, one's connection to one's materials and one's craft and the service of art. And it is so inspiring. It really does lift you up. Then this is the only one that I have found recently that has just blown me away. Is called Free Play, Improvisation in Life and Art by Stephen Nachmanovich, who, he's around. He's he's a jazz instrumentalist. But what he writes about improvisation, because he does free jazz, which is all improvisation, listening to everybody. But what he has to say about the creative process is so inspiring, that it's all improvisation. It's all what you create in the moment, and the importance of being really present in that moment. And what I particularly love about him is his take on editing, which he says is also improvisation. So it's not like, I got to go through and do this kind of janitorial service on my book. No, he says it's improvisation until it's delivered. You're still free to open it up and play. And the playfulness is the important part, that it shows a certain reserve of power to be able to play after creating a big piece of work or during it, that you not only have all the technique and the craft, but you still have the ability to do pirouettes. You still can play with it. And it keeps it creative. It's creative all the way through. So I really love this book. Then there are these two books. Now, you know that I love using the senses in writing. I think it's so important that we are sensual organisms. We have really been cut off from the senses in a horrible, serious, despicable way, that even the most primitive person cooking over a fire in their, outside, lives a richer life of the senses than we do, because we're just completely deodorized, sanitized, air conditioned, cut off from the world, and that cuts us off from who we are as, million-year organisms. And so these books are just essential. So the first one is The Natural History of the Senses by Diane Ackerman, and I'm going to turn this around so you can see it. There it is. Natural History of the Senses by Diane Ackerman. What a beautiful book. What a beautiful book. And the other one is The Spell of the Sensuous by David Abram. And I thought this was really beautiful as well. I would start with the Ackerman and start with the Ackerman, and if you love it as much as I did, then you're going to definitely want to read The Spell of Sensuous. The two books are like, this is why you enter into the body of the character as you're reading, is because you use the senses when you're writing. So you're not just looking at characters. If they're feeling things, then you're in the body. If they whack their shin, it's ow. You are the character. They smell some. There's always, smells. There's light. And how to write about, how to think about the senses. These books are just must have. Then, what else do I have? This is going to interest many. This is How to Suppress Women's Writing by Joanna Russ. And I was reading this as I started becoming a writer. She didn't write it, but it's clear she did the deed. She wrote it, but she shouldn't have. She wrote it, but look at what she wrote about. She wrote it, but she only wrote one of it. All the different ways people tear down women's writing. So this is just really good in the emotional self-defense department if you're a woman. Some of the ways that, and if you're a person of color, it's the same thing, just fill in the blank a little differently, how people get disappeared as writers. And every writer needs to arm themselves against that, have some sort of a sense of where the attacks are going to come from. And then these are some of my personal, as an artist, the things I go to. As fiction writers, all we have are words. That's all we have is one word up against another word to make a sentence, which then makes a meaning, which then makes a story. But so many writers new fiction writers, concentrate so hard on just telling the story that they forget that half of the act and most of the art is in one word after another. The music, the sound, the word choice, the really micro-level stuff. And as someone who had to come along this path, I discovered that what I was missing was the poetry. I'd never read poetry. I always thought poetry was sort of cult. People who were super into poetry or like their own little thing. I took a class in college, my one college creative writing class. There were 3 fiction writers and like 18 poets. And so we thought ourselves as the proletariat. We had our little cabal. But poetry seemed very esoteric. There was a lot of counting of syllables and what? I just couldn't wrap my head around it. But my fiction got to a certain place where I could tell a story. I had a pretty good sense of character. I had a pretty good sense of event. Still wasn't getting published. The writing just was no good. It was boring. It was just very basic. And I realized that what I was missing was the poetry. So, when they study fruit flies to study genetics, it's not because people like fruit flies. It's because the genes are very large. They're very easy to study. So when you talk about poetics and the sound, is it making the music? And you'll see that in the John Gardner, talking about the music of prose. you want to read poetry out loud. Get used to reading poetry out loud so that you can hear the music. Then you read your own stuff out loud, and you can tell that you need clunk, 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 that nothing interesting. Either it feels like oatmeal in the mouth after the beautiful, chunky sounds of a good poet, or it's missing, it kind of is limping, it needs something else to make the music. And the poet that I recommend is Dylan Thomas. Let's turn it around. There's old Dylan, looking very chubby and charming. What a poet. And if you can ever listen to him read his own stuff out loud, I mean, the guy is mesmerizing. And what I do, and I will have my students do, is take a poem. I've had them do a poem called The Ballad of the Long-Legged Bait, which is like an 11 page, so everybody in the classroom can read it, read a stanza. Read it to yourself, read it out loud, and listen to the music. Then when you read your own stuff out loud, you'll hear where you're not kind of coming up to the, I'm trying to find that poem. There we go. You'll hear when you're not quite making the music, and then go back and work on it. Get your thesaurus, get the right words, and listen to the assonance and the alliteration. So these are the poetic terms. Assonance is the repetition of vowel sounds. Ah, 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 I, e, whatever. And the alliteration is the repetition of consonant sounds, like all the L's, all the R's, all the P's. And this is what knits a poem together. It also knits a piece of prose together. So read it out loud to yourself for 10 minutes, and then read your own stuff out loud. And I guarantee you'll start cranking up the quality of what you're doing. The Ballad of the Long-Legged Bait. I'm not going to read 11 pages. I'm just going to read a little bit so you can hear. You can't miss the music of this poetry. That's why I picked Dylan. The boughs glided down, and the coast, blackened with birds, took a last look at his thrashing hair and whale-blue eye. The trodden town rang its cobbles for luck. Then goodbye to the fisherman bird with its anchor free and fast, as a bird hooking over the sea, high and dry by the top of the mast, whispered the affectionate sand and the bulwarks of the dazzled quay. For my sake sail and never look back, said the looking land. Boy, you read that out loud, then you read your own stuff, and it's like, Okay, Dylan. What have we next? And then these are two books where just the prose style is so beautiful that I often just refer to them in my, when I'm feeling low, when I'm feeling uninspired. The Winged Seed by Lee Young Lee, who again is a poet, and you can really, really hear the Dylan Thomas here. He is obviously a Dylan Thomas guy. He does some stuff that Dylan does. The Winged Seed, and The Lover by Marguerite Duras. These are both very short books, and way worth reading and rereading. These books live right behind my desk, so I can pull them off of the shelf and replenish myself. So these are my suggestions for books, and I definitely would say you need the quartet of reference books, the dictionary, the thesaurus with the finger tabs, Roget, a good English composition book, just a plain old English comp. Then the two great, the great writing book, Art of Fiction, the great literary conversation, Living by Fiction by Annie Dillard, and the Paris Review, Writers at Work, Paris Review Interviews, Free Play by Stephen Nachmanovitch, The Art Spirit by Robert Henri, A Natural History of the Senses and the Spell of the Sensuous, Diane Ackerman, David Abram, Dylan Thomas, Lee Young Lee, and Marguerite Duras, and Political Armament, How to Suppress Women's Writing by Joanna Russell. So thank you, and we look forward to next week. All right, I wish you good writing. Bye.